The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Tonight on the agenda, John Michael McGrath and I with our weekly On Poly podcast. Do these laws requiring referendums in the future actually mean anything at all?
For now, I will say no. They do not really handcuff future governments at all.
Then,
the very essence of the role of being nonpartisan, apolitical, and having the respect. It's a very special relationship between the First Minister and the Lieutenant-Governor.
hey partner.
Hello.
You know what's a good sign?
What is a good sign?
I'm about to tell you. It's a good sign when you do your first ever video edition of a podcast that you've been doing for 4 or 5 years, and they invite you to come back and do it again the following week.
Right.
It's a good sign.
We were not canceled after the pilot.
We were not canceled after the pilot. Isn't that a beautiful thing?
Yes.
Give me a little fist bump on that. That's a beautiful thing. Okay, well, normally we start this podcast with an email that caught our fancy, but we're going to mix it up a bit this week because last week was our first video episode of the podcast, as we indicated, and we got far more reaction than we normally do. So we're going to hold off responding to multiple emails until later in this episode, and we're going to dive right into events at Queen's Park this past week because MPPs were back in the saddle, so to speak, after a 10-week hiatus away from the building. You were there, John Michael, on the first day back. I watched it on TV, but you were there. What stood out to you?
It always has the feeling of the first day of school. And in fact, as I was walking through the halls, one MPP did say, first day of kindergarten to me.
Who said that? You want to name names?
No, I will not name their names. Treating that as off the record.
Okay.
Kind of. I would say everybody seemed energized for very different reasons, right? The Liberals have a still brand new leader, and Bonnie Crombie was first of the day with a press conference in the media studio, and then she attended the traditional post-question period scrums. Liberals feeling, energized and ready to take the fight to the government again. The Premier, conversely, also, I think, is, at least so far, is enjoying the idea of tussling with Crombie, and certainly is. The Conservatives have called her the queen of the carbon tax, and they've launched all of these attacks against her. So
they love that you just repeated that.
I know. But my point is that Premier Ford really seems eager to sort of mix it up. The NDP obviously going after the government. I think most recently about the Supreme Court defeat. The Court of Appeal defeat over Bill 124, which was the government's wage suppression legislation, and then the Greens, and we'll get to this a bit more in a bit. But Mike Schreiner, very, very proud to introduce his second MPP to the Green Party.
They doubled the size of their caucus.
Yes, been 5 years of work for Mike Schreiner as an MPP, but he has doubled the size of the caucus, and was very happy about that.
Well, let me pick up on the Crombie angle because she is, of course, still trying to get her footing as the new Liberal leader. A new entrant to provincial politics as she is. She's been in municipal as the mayor of Mississauga. She was a Liberal MP federally, so provincial politics is new to her. She does not have a seat in the legislature, so how is she trying to get attention for the causes that she cares about?
The traditional way to do this, and we've seen this now with two Liberal leaders, because of course Stephen Del Duca also did not have a seat in the legislature. You show up for press conferences at the media studio, and technically you need an MPP to invite you to do that, but Bonnie Crombie has no problem finding a Liberal MPP willing to invite her.
There's still a few down there, aren't there?
Yes. I believe, it's 9. And one of the things that came out in the scrums after question period on Tuesday is that Bonnie Crombie is still seriously considering running in the Milton by-election that will happen with the,
Parm Gill, the departure of Parm Gill.
Yes, with the departure of Parm Gill for federal politics. So we'll obviously be keeping an eye on that.
I should let you know, I'm the one who's supposed to have the senior moments on this program, not you. I'm relying on you to help me when I have the senior moments.
Yeah, but see, I got like the brain problem with my phone. I Google everything now, and so my brain isn't actually used to storing things.
Okay. Moving right along, as they say.
Yes, moving right along. I mentioned the Tories are quite happy to launch these attacks against Bonnie Crombie. We did also get some definition there, what the Tories mean when they accuse her of wanting to bring in a carbon tax, because this was kind of not clear to me. And it turns out that what they're mostly referring to is the fact that Bonnie Crombie ran for Liberal MP, her federal career, in 2008. During that campaign, Stéphane Dion, the then federal Liberal leader, had proposed imposing a carbon tax nationally and cutting the GST.
The green shift, he called it.
Yes, indeed. And so they are saying that, Crombie supported that move. Therefore, she supports a carbon tax. Crombie is a bit more opaque on this topic, really refused to be pinned down about whether the Liberals still support the idea of bringing a provincial carbon tax back to Ontario. Of course, currently Ontario operates under the federal carbon tax.
It seems to me the federal government is not completely clear that it still wants a carbon tax, at least not for Atlantic Canada. But that's another edition for another show.
Yeah.
I want to pick up on the Green angle that you referenced a second ago, because yes, indeed, there is a second Green MPP at Queen's Park, an historic victory in a by-election in Kitchener Centre not all that long ago. The MPP's name is Aislinn Clancy, and I want to spell this for you because her first name is spelled Aislinn, but it's not pronounced Aislinn. It's pronounced Aislinn. How did she do in her first appearances at Queen's Park?
I want to say for a moment that, there are a lot of rituals and pageantry at Queen's Park, and at most of them I could take or leave. The ritual of a new MPP being presented to the House after a by-election win, they get marched into the House, they stand in front of the speaker, and usually the party leader introduces them and says, and they now come to claim their right to take a seat in this legislature. It is one of my favorite rituals. I just love it.
And everybody applauds, right?
Everybody applauds. Yeah. It is a moment of collegiality in the House as they welcome a new member. Everybody's on different teams, but they're all playing the same sport,
Nicely put.
And so this was slightly more special because, as we say, this is kind of historic. This is only the second ever a Green MPP in the House. She got, I don't know if it's possible to rank whether she got more or less applause. She certainly got fulsome applause from the assembled MPPs. There was a funny moment where you get marched into the legislature, and she sort of, it was a literal misstep. She was walking in the wrong place, and Mike Schreiner had to sort of grab her, and she did this sort of very funny to me anyway. She was sort of walking backwards like a robot in reverse. It was funny in the moment. Oops, shaking the desk.
I don't know this for sure, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was her first time she was ever in the legislative chamber, on the floor of the legislature. Certainly not, during a session would have been the first time she'd ever been there. So she could be forgiven for making a wrong turn.
Yes, I think I might have done the same.
Yeah. Well, let's pick up on the government's agenda here, because one of the first things the province is trying to get done in this session is pass a giant bill called the Get It Done Act. So we're going to do a bit of a deep dive on this now. First of all, what are some of the disparate elements that are in this mega bill?
Right. So this is one bill with many different sections that it does a bunch of different things. It bans tolls on bans new tolls on provincial highways. It legislates a freeze in the rate of in the fines for both Ontario driver's licenses and Ontario photo cards. It implements license plate renewals. Obviously, or maybe not obviously, folks remember that the government did away with the fee to renew their license plates, but it didn't do away with the obligation to renew license plates. And so it turned out that a lot of people, when they no longer had to pay the fee, they weren't renewing their plates. And the Toronto Star reported that there might have been as much as 1 million drivers on the road.
Whoops.
Yeah, whoops, exactly.
With expired plates.
Notably, one of the groups that was complaining most about the problems this was causing was the Ontario Provincial Police, who were saying, we can't spend our days pulling over every single driver with expired stickers. We need to figure out a solution here. And so the government is saying that plates will just renew automatically, except when there is some reason not to renew, so like an existing speeding ticket or something like that. There is also a change to the environmental assessment process where for provincial projects like highways, most notably, the government will be able to expropriate land even before the environmental assessment is complete. So for the 413 highway, for example, which is one of the big provincial priorities right now, the government is able to start acquiring the land to build that highway, even though the environmental assessment is likely to take many years. And then finally, the government is reversing, I think I can use that word. Reversing its decisions on urban land expansions. These were a bunch of cities across the province. The province stepped in and, sorry, I should say the government stepped in and expanded the amount of land that these cities could expand into, farmland that they could turn into subdivisions. Then late last year, because of the unpopularity of certain other land use decisions this government made, they reversed that decision. And then they are now saying, having consulted with these cities, because some cities were saying, actually, we do need to expand our urban boundaries. The government is now using legislation to re-expand some, but not all of those urban boundaries. Ottawa and Hamilton are being left alone.
That's a lot in a mega bill, and we're not done. There's more. The province is also hoping to pass an unusual requirement to hold a referendum in the future if... What?
If any future government wants to introduce a carbon tax, and I think we would say generically that the government would hope this would also include the cap and trade system that they inherited and dismantled, that any kind of carbon pricing would require a referendum to be held and obviously would require a majority of voters to approve that carbon price.
So let me just make sure I understand this. The current government of Ontario is handcuffing future governments for the rest of all time in passing any new carbon tax or putting a price on carbon forever unless they hold a referendum and get the public's permission.
They are trying to.
Well, if passed, yes,
Yes.
if passed. But that's the idea.
That's the idea.
Would it be churlish of me to point out, maybe it would be, but I'm going to do it anyway, the Mike Harris government tried the very same thing about 25 years ago, but at that time it was... There must be a referendum if any future government wants to raise taxes. And in fact, and that bill did pass,
Yes.
in fact, a future progressive conservative government did want to raise taxes, but they simply passed another law saying we're going to have an exemption to the referendum law for these tax increases, and then they promptly legislated those tax increases, all of which is to say, do these laws requiring referendums in the future actually mean anything at all?
I'm going to get into this a bit more for the your column, my column bit. So I will just, for now, I will say no, they do not really handcuff future governments at all. In my column, I described it as performative nonsense, and I will elaborate on that later in the pod.
Okay, we'll come back to that because that's a good subject for discussion. We've been calling this a mega bill. We've been calling it a giant bill. In fact, the technical term for what the government is trying to do here, it's called an omnibus bill. And I took enough high school Latin to know that omnibus means for all or for everything. And essentially what it means is the government is going to throw everything but the kitchen sink into this bill, even if disparate elements in the bill have no particular relationship to one another. It's an approach. What do you think of that approach?
I will also add the omnibus was one of the first forms of mass transportation in early in industrial cities. But that's perhaps a nerdy point for a different podcast.
Definitely a McGrath point, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, these kinds of bills, it's a tool, right? And I think the classic example of an omnibus bill is like the budget measures bill that gets introduced, right? The finance minister gets up, he gives a big speech about all of the ways that the government is going to change policy to change the financial situation of the province, they would say, for better. And by necessity, that can end up touching a lot of different parts of provincial policy. And so you need a bill that touches, that does a bunch of different things to match the budget plan.
Except that.
In this case, and I think a lot of people would say that most modern governments have relied on omnibus legislation more than is strictly necessary. And in a case like this, it's especially when, frankly, a lot of the things that this bill does are symbolic, maybe. Maybe I won't repeat the word performative. It's just much more opportunistic.
And I have seen instances in the past, and I'll admit not many, but there have been some, where speakers of the legislature, who are often MPPs from the governing party, have told the governing party, I'm sorry, this violates the spirit of democracy. You can't have this many disparate elements in a bill which have nothing to do with one another and put them all in there together. It's just not appropriate. And they have said to governments in the past, you got to take some of that stuff out and try and pass it separately, which, of course, if they've got a majority government, they can do. But it's about the appearance of doing democracy properly, I guess, is the way I would put it.
Yeah, the fundamental point here is that MPPs are supposed to have the opportunity to debate matters properly. And when you shoehorn everything into one bill, sort of by definition, you're forcing the opposition to constrain the amount of time that they devote to any one part of the bill. And that's also true with budget bills, which are always, I believe they're almost always time allocated, right? You have a certain amount of time to pass the budget. With something like this, these things sort of all hang together a little bit if you sort of squint at it a little. But yes, I mean, the speaker does still retain the authority in some cases to tell a government, actually, this needs to be broken up and you need to give MPPs the ability to do their jobs.
We want to earn our bona fides here as a deeply nerdy podcast. So I am going to reach into the dark recesses of my memory and recall, I think, one of the most controversial omnibus bills ever passed, and this was in the federal parliament, and we're going back to the late 1960s now. John Turner, the former prime minister, was at this time the Minister of Justice and Attorney General for Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau. And Mr. Turner wanted to make a bunch of changes to the criminal code in Canada. He wanted to legalize abortion under some circumstances. He wanted to legalize homosexuality, which, if you can imagine, was illegal in Canada at that time. He wanted to change the rules around divorce so that, again, if you can imagine this, so that you would not have to go to the Parliament of Canada to get permission from Parliament to get a divorce. Yeah. And he wanted those and other criminal code amendments to pass. And Prime Minister Trudeau said to him, you got to do it in an omnibus bill because this is going to be fraught and we're going to go do it and do it all at once. And Mr. Turner, I would suggest to his credit, said, no, I want to break it up. I don't want to do them individually. But the Prime Minister wouldn't let him. And at the end of the day, it's the PM's prerogative, and the PM told him to do it all at once, and he did. And if you prefer the way it is in Canada today, under those three categories and more, you can thank John Turner for that. So there we go. Anyway, let's move along. On to your column, my column. Okay, time now for our regular feature, Your Column, My Column, in which JMM and I reminisce about the columns we wrote for TVO.org over the past week. JMM, you gave us a little hint of what you want to dive into again, so fire away. Yeah,
so I wrote about the Get It Done bill or Get It Done Act that the government has introduced, and I just want to sort of elaborate a little bit on my irritation with this kind of law, or rather the two elements, the referendum on the carbon tax and nominally prohibiting road tolls on public highways. Whatever you think about the policy merits of those positions, the fact is it is a fundamental principle of our Constitution that you cannot bind the hands of a future legislature by passing simple laws.
Which they're trying to do right now.
Which is what they are trying to do. And you mentioned the history of the Harris government passing what they call the Taxpayer Protection Act. Again, it's nothing to get around these laws. And what I think it does, though, is it leaves people misinformed about what our governments do and how they work. We are an educational broadcaster, and I'm somewhat partial to the idea that people should be properly informed about how governments work. This irritates me, and that's quite aside from the fact that I think at least, I've been I've put this on the record previously that I actually support the idea of like road tolls and carbon pricing in both those cases. My views remain unpopular, but that's really beside this particular point.
Indeed. Okay, are you ready for a bit of a story?
I am, absolutely.
Get comfortable here, because I did a column this past week on something that basically was half a century or more in the making. For 52 years, there's a former finance minister in Ontario back in the 1970s named Darcy McHugh. He was Bill Davis's treasurer. And he used to host an annual, what he called the John P. Robarts Annual Luncheon. And it was a luncheon that he started to honor his mentor and political hero, Mr. Robarts, who was the first premier to put Mr. McHugh in the cabinet, as he did in the 1960s. Then after Mr. Robarts died in 1982, Mr. McHugh kept this luncheon going in memory of the former premier. And I don't know how long ago this was now, 15, 16, 17, I don't know. That a while ago, I wrote a book about John Robarts, and so I got invited to this lunch as well over the last many years. Now, last December, the lunch was always in December. This past December, the lunch didn't happen. It didn't happen because Mr. McHugh got sick and died. Age 91, he had a good life. But the question then remained what to do about this annual lunch. So I decided, with the permission of Mr. McHugh's two sons, to try to continue it with a few changes. First of all, I renamed it the Robarts McHugh Luncheon to acknowledge Mr. McHugh's creating it in the first place. And second, with apologies to the former treasurer, as he looks down on us right now, the guest list for the luncheon would no longer be exclusively white, male, octogenarian or nonagenarian progressive conservatives. We were going to broaden the base a bit. All parties were going to be invited, all genders, all generations, most importantly. I wanted younger people there as well. People who had been in public life, and it was really lovely to see all these people who, you know, when they were in politics, were really trying very hard to end one another's political careers, were suddenly gathering together, there's about 36 of them, and really enjoying the fellowship of one another's company in the spirit of friendship. And I had no intention of writing a column about it, but Monty McNaughton, the former Ford-era cabinet minister, he was there. He actually represented part of the same part of the province that Darcy McHugh did. Mm-hmm. And he suggested, you know, the spirit in that room, people need to know about that. Paikin, you should write a column about that. And so I did. And I think we'll put the link to the column in the show notes, as we do for both of our columns. But if you want to find it, it's on the TVO website as well, tvo.org. Find my picture, click on it, the column will be there. There's some lovely pictures that we took on the day. I think my favorite is the current finance minister, Peter Bethlen-Falvey, flanked by three former cabinet ministers, Greg Sorbera, Floyd Loughran, Janet Ecker, all three different parties represented there. It was a nice moment. Peter Bethlen-Falvey in another picture with Ian MacDonald, who's now 95 and was the Deputy Minister of Finance in the Robarts years. So that was kind of a neat moment as well. Anyway, lots of fun. There seemed to be a lot of desire in the room to have this be an annual thing. So I think we're going to try to do that again next year.
You know, I think it's very easy to, and you know, there is legitimately a lot of acrimony in politics, and you know, some acrimony is good and healthy. Yeah. And I think you know, this goes back to the ritual of you know, that we were talking about with Ashland Clancy. There is also a lot of genuine camaraderie in politics. You know, I used the words, right, like they're on different teams, but they're all playing the same game. And I think that explains some of it, that, you know, when these people leave Queen's Park, they do still carry a lot of that time, the memories with them, and it's not like anywhere else. You know, it's not like any other job, and these people are part of what is still a pretty small club overall, right? There's only 124 MPPs, and
in a province of, what are we up to now? Like 15 million people?
Million,
yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a pretty small club.
Yeah.
Good. All right, let's go on to our mailbag. We do love getting your feedback at onpolitics@tvo.org. And JMM, why don't you start? What do we got this week?
We have a bunch of questions and some very kind comments from our listeners and now viewers. Here is our first from Jason Bazadian from Toronto, who asks, hi, Paikin and JMM. Love the show and wanted to ask about the Lieutenant Governor. Note my pronunciation there.
Beautiful. Nicely done. Yeah.
How does one get the role? Is it purely an appointment, or are there some nominal requirements? Thanks, Jason.
Well, Jason, good question. The answer is both. Now, let's go through this. The Lieutenant Governor technically is appointed by the Governor General on the advice of the Prime Minister. Technically. Basically, the PM appoints who he or she wants to be the Lieutenant Governor in all of the provinces across Canada. It's usually a 5-year term, but as we know, during COVID, the federal government was just very content to let Elizabeth Dowdeswell stay there. She was doing the job so well. So she actually just finished the job in November after 9 years as Lieutenant Governor, longest serving in Ontario history. The list of functions that an LG needs to fulfill includes representing the Crown in Ontario, now the King, acting as sort of the official host of the province of Ontario at special events. They often pick particular causes that they want to champion. They recognize outstanding citizens. You know, they preside over the Order of Ontario ceremony every year. The LG also, a lot of people don't know this, the LG has to sign every bill before it becomes law. So nothing becomes the law until it gets, quote unquote, royal assent. And you get that when the Lieutenant Governor signs the bill. It is also the Lieutenant Governor's job to advise, listen to, and warn the Premier of the day about what he or she is hearing. Now, Edith Dumont en français, she is the new Lieutenant Governor of Ontario, the first Francophone to hold the office. She's got the job now, and I haven't met her yet. Have you met her?
No, I have not met her.
I look forward to that day when it comes. Anyway, pick up the story if you would.
You already mentioned the causes that various LGs have, traditionally brought to prominence. I mean, with David Onley, of course, it was accessibility. That was an issue that he cared deeply about because of his own life. Madame Dumont has a history of advocating for la francophonie, and so I don't know if she's said that will be her cause, but it wouldn't surprise anybody, certainly. We will wait and see at what she turns her mind to.
Great. Okay, next up, here's a question from a viewer named John McMillan from Toronto who writes, "Hi, Steve and John. Stumbled onto your podcast/video debut on tonight's The Agenda after watching Jeopardy!, he adds. Signed up immediately to listen on Apple Podcasts. Fie on me for not knowing about your show before this. It's okay, John. We're glad to have you now." John continues, "I note that at the end of each Ontario government TV advertisement now includes a musical jingle or tag similar to the O Canada tag in the Government of Canada's ads. Ontario's musical tag appears to be the last few bars of Ontario, the province's 1967 centennial year anthem, A Place to Stand, which my generation, and I guess I can say which our generation, because I think John and I are in the same one, we learned that by rote." John's questions: does the Ontario government still own the rights to that song or jingle? And if so, which ministry owns it? And is it true that it was written by the same woman who wrote the old dun da dun da dun dun da dun da dun dun da dun da dun da 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 Hockey Night in Canada theme song? And as an aside, does the government really think that anyone other than boomers like me would get it? Great show. Looking forward to future episodes. Will tell my friends. John McMillan. Beautiful. Okay, John, thank you so much for that. Ontario, A Place to Stand, A Place to Grow was, in fact, written by the same woman, Dolores Clayman, who did the hockey theme on Hockey Night in Canada. It was commissioned by the government of John Robarts alongside the Academy Award-winning film A Place to Stand. That was for Expo 67 in Montreal when the World's Fair came to Montreal. The song's publisher is Gordon V. Thompson Music, so there is a good chance that the rights lay with someone else as opposed to with the government of Ontario. We're going to put a link to both the song and the film in the show notes. There's also a defunct page on the ontario.ca website that will post the archived version with a lot more info there as well. And look, let me say this outright. You don't have to be of a certain generation to love this song. Everybody knows this song, right? Do you know the song?
You know what? I actually don't.
Come on. McGrath, this is why you still need me. This is why you're not hosting this show on your own. Give us a place to stand and a place to grow, and we'll call this land Ontario, a place to live for you and me. You still nothing? Nothing.
I'm sorry, man. Okay. This was out of the schools by the time I was going through them.
But they brought it back for the Canada 150 celebrations. Kathleen Wynn's government brought it back.
I was out of school by then.
Okay. Well, anyway, it is a wonderful song. It is wildly nostalgic for those of us of a certain age, and I'm going to teach you the words before you're done here, okay? Your turn. Next note.
Boy, I just cannot wait. All right. Here is one from Nelson Mahmoudi from Ottawa, who writes, "Hi, J-Man and Steve. Thanks for making such a great podcast. Love all the content and your coverage of complex topics, which make for easy listening while I'm on a break at work. Or, just while you're supposed to be working, you could listen to us anyway.
Why not?
We're not going to tell.
Nope.
2 questions for you both. Steve, were you at the PWHL game in Toronto between Montreal and Toronto? Let's take that one first. Were you at this hockey?
Professional Women's Hockey League, I watched it on TV. I was not at the game. It's too hard to get tickets. They're sold out for the whole year.
What?
They're playing at Maple Leaf Gardens, where it's, like 2,100, 2,200 seats. So no, watched, but not in person.
Okay. Number 2, what's the difference between a hamlet, village, township, town, and city? Are there population thresholds that determine where certain municipalities fall for naming's sake? Nelson, this makes me so happy. I looked in the Municipal Act, but couldn't find anything. Help. Take care, you both.
Okay.
Nelson from Ottawa.
This is such a John Michael McGrath question, the second part. So I'm definitely tossing this one over to you to tell us the difference between a hamlet, a village, a township, a town, or a city. McGrath, you're on.
Okay, so some of these names refer to like when the first European surveyors laid out farm lots in what would have then been Upper Canada, and like hamlets and townships were like, and I guess villages would have been like the atomic particle of land that these surveyors created, and those are sort of like the very, very small smallest, not even municipalities exactly, but like smallest geographic increments of land in Ontario. And then when you get into things like towns and villages or towns and cities in particular, no, there's no distinction between the best example of this is that what is now the city of Markham was officially the town of Markham up until 2012, and it had a population of 300,000 people. It was the 12th largest municipality in the country, I think, if not, certainly it was one of the largest in Ontario. And yet it was called a town. There are no rules requiring a town to start calling itself a city once it reaches a certain population or anything like that. It is left entirely up to the local councils and what they feel like calling themselves.
You had far too much fun answering that question.
I loved reading that question. I loved answering it. And you know what? If people want to keep sending us really, really nerdy municipal policy questions, just know that, viewer, I'm here for you.
Why don't you give folks the email in case they want to do that very thing?
Oh, right. Yes. The email is, what is
It's onpolitics@tvo.org.
Right. If you'd like to ask about content on the show or just ask us random nerdy questions, please email us at onpolitics@tvo.org. Make sure to include your first name, last name, and what city you live in.
Amen. Well, that is the On Poly podcast for this Friday, February 23rd, 2024.
You can follow our shows on Apple Podcasts so that you get notified each time a new episode is available. And if you already follow our show, help a friend follow it too.
Any feedback you have, we're happy to hear it. Good, bad, or indifferent. Here's the email again, onpolitics@tvo.org. And we're happy to take all your stuff. Until next Friday, bye-bye.
See you soon.
One day at Massey College at the University of Toronto, our next guest was giving a speech at a book launch. The speech was good. In fact, after it was over, former Ontario Finance Minister Greg Sorbera leaned over to me and said, "Why don't we just give her the job for life?" Well, Elizabeth Dowdeswell wasn't our Lieutenant Governor for life, but she did have the job for longer than anyone else ever. From 2014 to 2023, Her Honor managed to get to every riding in the province, representing the Crown and performing her duties with grace and perseverance. And we're delighted to welcome back to TVO Elizabeth Dowdeswell to find out what she thought of her 3,339 days as our LG. Good to have you back in that chair.
Thank you very much.
Can I take you way back? Let's go back to the beginning. Why did you want that job to begin with?
Because I was asked, and I was honored, and I couldn't imagine saying no. Never entered my head.
Why not? Because, there's a lot of controversy around the job. A lot of people think the job ought not even to exist anymore. So why take it?
But you know, you have an opportunity. It's such a mysterious platform. Part of the job is the constitutional aspect. And you see that demonstrated when you give the speech from the throne and when you swear in cabinet and when you sign documents and give royal assent. But that is such a small part of the opportunity.
The big part of the opportunity is what?
Is dealing with citizens of this province, of hearing their stories, of bringing them together in very informal ways, but just getting to know, who are these people? Why do they live where they do? Why? What are their aspirations for their communities? And what are the barriers they face?
Well, let me pick up on that, because I'm sure you did not plan to have this job during a once-in-a-century global pandemic in which, obviously, everything about how you did your job changed. Did you ever, during the course of that, think to yourself, maybe this wasn't such a great idea to have this job after all?
Absolutely not.
Why not?
Because I loved every day. There was never a day when I wasn't ready to get out of bed and go into work. And it was just the inspiration that comes. It was curiosity. I learned absolutely every day. And there wasn't a week that went by that I didn't think of something mischievous to be able to do, to be able to convene people, to be able to hear their stories.
Now that's interesting, because we don't think of the Lieutenant Governor as part of the job description being mischievous. So what do you mean by that?
Well, mischievous in the sense of bringing people together who don't normally have a chance to be together, introducing them to one another, talking about issues that are well beyond an electoral cycle, but just learning from each other and seeing the interest in their faces when they would be introduced to somebody whose work they'd never heard of, somebody like a Dr. Joe McGinnis, for example, an underwater doctor, adventurer, or even just the man down the street or the little girl down the street who's doing amazing things in her own neighborhood.
Well, one of the things I learned from you is that it's not just the Lieutenant Governor's job to advise her First Minister and take advice from, I guess, have those regular conversations as part of your job, but it is also your job to warn your First Minister. What did you warn a Premier about, for example?
Well, I would not release the confidences of those conversations.
Now, that's such a shame, because
Well, it may be, except that it's a respect for the position. If people started talking about what those conversations were all about, then the very essence of the role of being nonpartisan, apolitical, and having the respect. It's a very unique and special relationship between the First Minister and the Lieutenant Governor.
You know what you and I have in common? Is that I like to be mischievous in my job, too. So get ready, Your Honor. Here we go. You had two different premiers during your term, Kathleen Wynne and Doug Ford. Who'd you like dealing with more?
I always like dealing with the First Minister of the day, because I could try and understand what was going on. But it was more that you got to know them as human beings as well.
These two premiers, as I think back on the 26 people who've sat in that chair, couldn't be more different. One's a woman, one's a man. One's gay, one's straight. One's a liberal, one's a conservative. One's diminutive, one is big. One's a policy wonk, one's a populist. How do you, as LG, deal with two such starkly different characters consistently?
Well, I think you start from the perspective of respect. They have duly won an election. The public of this province have given them trust and confidence to take them where they need to go as a society. Why would I not respect that in them? And so what you do is, as anybody in public life does, you actively listen to what they're saying. You try and understand, and you really try and set aside your own views. I often would say that one of the most difficult parts of my job was learning to keep my mouth shut because I'd been in public policy a lot of my life, and I do have views on most things, but those get left at the door.
Do they confide in you?
Yes. In the sense of being respectful and coming to know the value of having someone they can talk to where they know the conversations go nowhere.
Again, you're going to forgive me here, but I want to just sort of gently push you a little bit more to reveal a bit more. Can you tell us the kinds of things, not the specifics, but the kinds of things that a premier of the day might confide in you?
Well, as you might expect, it depends on what kind of day they've had. So they may come in feeling exasperated, or they may come in and say, oh, I just need a break. I'm so glad I'm here. Or they may say, you know, I've been thinking a lot about such and such. What are you hearing on this same issue? And there are times when I would say, Premier, could you tell me why you took this decision? Or could you tell me what's behind this? And it's part of my due diligence. But as I say, it just leads to an amazing conversation.
What did they call you?
Your Honor.
Never called you Elizabeth or
Never.
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 What did you call them?
Premier.
Always.
Yes.
Never first names.
No.
Okay. Can you, again, going to push you a little further here if I can you say to a premier as part of doing your due diligence, you know, I've heard you want to announce X, Y, and Z, and, you know, I don't think that's going to work. Can you rethink that?
I would never put it like that.
How
What
you
I would
put it?
say is, I understand you're thinking about this. You know, here's what I hear from Ontarians. And both premiers were very respectful because, and certainly Premier Ford was fond of saying he didn't know anybody who'd been in every political riding in this province, including himself.
As you have.
And so he knew that when I said this was what I had heard or was hearing. And I think he also knew there were times when he knew that there were parts, and so did Premier Wynne, knew that I'd had this interesting set of experiences in public policy. And so sometimes it would be a question saying, did this ever come up in the work you did on such and such? And so it was usually very engaging conversations.
Did you ever have an argument?
I often said, I wish you wouldn't say that. Or,
Oh my gosh. Okay. Like about what?
oh no, I won't go there.
Because, you know,
Well, partly it was communications, or I'd say, why do you keep referring to that? Why do you frame it like that?
and there was clearly some edge in the question.
Well, curiosity sometimes,
Maybe more.
wanting to know.
I want to show you a couple of pictures here and have you discuss what is happening. Okay, Sheldon, can we have the first picture up here? This is Elizabeth Dowdeswell meeting a very nice older woman whose name, I believe, was the same as yours. That's you and Queen Elizabeth. Where is that meeting happening?
That's in Buckingham Palace.
Is that the first time you've met?
Yes.
That is. What is that like?
It's wonderful. I had had some engagement with members of the royal family in previous work, but not with her. But she was delightful, full of humor. She knew my file. Her very first question to me actually related to a visit that I'd made up to KI on Big Trout Lake, because I had invited, as part of the small team of people going, the Duchess of Edinburgh now, Sophie, and so she talked about that trip.
Do you, I presume you get briefed pretty heavily before you go in to meet the Queen, right? Do this, don't do that, that kind of thing?
Yes.
And, I mean, are you petrified when you're standing there with the Queen of... No, you're not?
She's very welcoming, very warm, very humorous. I remember one of the questions is always, what do you give a queen? You know, and so that people pay attention to that. And I decided that I would simply take a piece of blown glass done by an artist in Ontario. And the first thing she asked me was, "Tell me about this." And I say, "Well, Your Majesty, I always try to give gifts that I'd like to receive myself."
Nice.
And she thought about it, and she looked at it. It was a beautiful piece of a small piece of glass. And she said, "You know, I think I'm going to take this home with me." Because you know that people get so many gifts, they often go in closets. But she probably was saying that because she was very generous and kind and made me feel welcome. But I remember having a conversation with our High Commissioner in London, and he said, "Liz, you don't need to worry." She said, "The only thing on Her Majesty's mind will be how to make you feel comfortable."
And she did.
And she did.
Okay, here's another picture. Sheldon, can we have number 2 up, please? This is Premier Doug Ford and Lieutenant-Governor Elizabeth Dowdeswell. And I want to get to some of the behind the scenes of this picture, because this was an unusual occurrence. Almost 6 years ago, when Doug Ford was sworn in as the Premier, the official ceremony where you swore him in takes place inside the legislature. But then, of course, there was a big crowd outside, and the Premier, in essence, wanted to kind of reenact his swearing in outside the legislature, and he wanted you there for that reenactment. And I think that's unprecedented. I'm not sure that that kind of thing was ever done before, or frankly, quote unquote, is done. But he did it. And I wonder what kind of discussions you and your people had with him and his people beforehand to find the kosher way to make all of that happen.
You know, the role of a vice-regal involves a lot of tradition, continuity, all of those things through symbols and ceremonies that provide a safety net in many ways. It's part of our nature of constitutional democracy. And so these things matter very much. And yes, there were conversations about how to do it with dignity and respect. And that was what we tried to do. Recognizing that democracy is about people. It's about citizens. And it is about opening the doors to the ways in which things are done, allowing people in so it's not so much of a mystery, and respecting the views of citizens. So the fundamental underpinning of why would you do this was really all about a wonderful teaching moment to show more people.
Oh, to show people, okay.
To show people what actually goes on.
Because I presume there's a moment where he's saying, "I want to be sworn in again outside." I'm riffing here, so you know, confirm or deny as you like. I want to be, you know, I know you're swearing me in inside, Your Honor, but I want to be sworn in again outside in front of all of my support group. And I presume at some point you have to say to the Premier, "Well, we don't do that. I do this once and I don't kind of do it again for show afterwards." How close did you get to actually having to say to him, you know, "I'm sorry, Premier, I'm just not going to do that"?
I think that's when you rely on good teamwork, and it was certainly our teams were talking about what was doable, and when you listen to the real intent of the key person involved, then you can always find a way.
So you understood that he would very much want to share this experience with his supporters, and therefore you were content to kind of enable that as you could while respecting tradition. Have I got that right?
That's right, and it wasn't just supporters, and that was certainly the view that we took, which was this was an educational opportunity for citizens.
Okay, you know there are people who think that you represent an outdated institution and that there's really no need for it anymore. And I guess I want to give you the chance to make the case, you having done the job for nearly a decade, as to why you think it's still useful to have a lieutenant governor in Ontario.
You know, I think I feel very fortunate that I actually was in this position during the time of a crisis. Because we saw during COVID that someone needed to provide stability, continuity, tradition, someone who didn't have an agenda. And it wasn't, for some people, it was comforting to know that there was someone who was there every day concerned about citizens. And when I say that, it's because it wasn't about my agenda. It was that we were able to amplify what was actually going on.
I should ask you this as well. The typical job of a lieutenant governor lasts 5 years, and you had the job for 9. Did you ever call Ottawa at any point during your term and say, you know, guys, I'm like seriously overtime here. Do you plan to replace me at some point, or did you ever do that?
No, because I was in absolute denial. I adored the position, and in fact, one of the things that I'm faced with now as I embrace change and go through this transition is I cannot, for the life of me, imagine how anything I do from here on in will it all measure up to the last almost 10 years. It's
well, people in public life, premiers and cabinet ministers always face that. They know their next job's never going to be as good as or as impactful as the previous one, and you figure out how to navigate that conundrum.
The real joy of my 10 years has not been in the grand moments. They've been in the intimate moments. They've been in the conversations where you're holding someone's hand and thanking them on behalf of their country for what they've done. Or taking, when we couldn't gather in public, taking a medal to someone in their driveway and having the opportunity to talk to their family about what this means to them. It's about inviting into the suite an Afghan family who've been helped to escape by journalists in this city, helping them get from safe house to safe house, and then coming in to tell their story to me. And sometimes in tears, but being able to say to them, I asked you here because I want you to know you belong here and you're welcome here. And so often I think I was very selfish. I mean, that mattered to me. But it was those quiet moments, those intimate moments, those one-on-one conversations that are so much more meaningful than all of the big honorary awards that we do. It's those conversations, and that's why we did 700 to 800 events a year, because it was taking the time to be with people. I will never forget those opportunities to honor people with an Order of Canada because they were too ill to go to Rideau Hall. I'll never forget the way too many funerals that I was a part of. But I'll also remember the call to the commissioner of the OPP or the chief of police finding out that someone was murdered on their watch. Again, because so many people don't have anyone to talk to. And that's how you learn about people. It's telling those stories is the first step to creating empathy. Because if you have to walk in someone else's shoes, even just through listening to them, that changes the picture, changes the conversation. And we just need more places to do that. The things I learned through COVID, governments really do matter at moments of crisis. You can, in fact, develop trust and confidence in science and technology so that you actually have evidence-based policy. But I also learned about, as we all did, about interdependence, interconnectedness, and I learned about inequities. We had so many inequities that were laid bare. And now we have, having learned all of those things, now we're faced with global challenges, global crises, all at the same time. A pandemic that's not over yet, climate change that's no longer academic. It's here in spades. And changing geopolitics. You know, why is it that we have these unthinkable wars? And each and every one of those is affecting everybody around the globe, but it's affecting everyone here at home. Who would have thought we'd have dinner conversations about supply chain management? And who would have thought that actually it was people in the economic sector who've come to realize that issues in the social sector that were called women's issues, like childcare, are actually critical to being able to bring us back to economic prosperity. So many lessons and so many stories.
Okay, am I allowed to say how old you are?
You will whether I ask you or not, or whether I let you or not.
Your next birthday is going to be number 80.
Can you imagine?
I can't. Because,
doesn't feel that way.
Well, and it doesn't look that way, obviously, or whatever our impression of being 80 is. But you still think you've got another big mission in you?
Absolutely. Do you know, one of the joys of this experience has been uncovering how many people have passed their 100th birthday. I loved going up to Sunnybrook, to the Veterans Wing, because people are so happy there. They always have smiles on their faces. They're telling these wonderful stories to one another. And so many of them, a large portion of them, are well over 100 now.
So you got 20 years to go.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's our former chief storyteller, comforter-in-chief, and 29th Lieutenant Governor of Ontario, Elizabeth Dowdeswell. We're so glad that you could make some time for us to come here, and I really look forward to seeing what you're going to do next. Thanks, Your Honor.
You're welcome.
Next week on the agenda.
An Earthship may look like something out of this world, but it actually has a lot to do with planet Earth. Earthship homes are self-sustaining, off-grid structures that channel renewable sources of energy like wind, water, and the sun to power them.
It does everything for itself.
That's next week on the agenda.